So should we start?
Yes.
All right. Welcome everybody to the conference call on behalf of Indian Americans Forum. We are conducting this conference call on the topic of Eminent Kalpana Sharma and Niranjan is already here. This call is co-sponsored by Hindus for Human Rights, led by our co-founder Sunita Vishwanathji and Raju Rajgopalji, and the Global Indian Progressive Alliance, led by Manish Madanji, and our active Indian American Forum members present in the team: Motika, Debalina, Iqbal, Ramakrishna Jalla, our core team. So I welcome everybody to the conference call on the topic of press freedoms in India. The reason we are brainstorming on the topic today is to see how and what the take of our eminent journalist from India is on the current status of press freedoms in India, including the electronic media and the print media. We are all aware of the biases and unethical journalism and government-run media in particular playing into the hands of the state. We want to have our opinion, after the speaker make a call on this. National community, we are concerned when we watch some of the media journalists
It's freezing, Mama. It's sometimes
into the hand. So can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, it's breaking, Jamil bhai. I think.
Okay.
So
let me rephrase my sentences. Since we are going live, I don't want to break anything. But in brief, we are going to talk about press freedoms in India, both print media and electronic media, and how the current status of affairs of the press freedoms vis-a-vis these two important, print as well as electronic media. We want to get a take from one of the two important media journalists, Mr. Niranjan and Sharma, on what think the current state of affairs of media, both electronic, and how the state is tilting the public opinion using these two important media outlets, and particularly how the anchors are playing into the hands of the state and how they are tilting public opinion. So with this intro, I'm beginning the conference call organized by Indian Americans Forum, as well as co-sponsored by Hindus for Human Rights, led by Sunita Vishwanathji and Raju Rajgopalji, and Global Indian Progressive Alliance, Mr. Manish Madan, and our active team members, Motan, Debalina, Iqbal, Ramakrishna Jalla, on our call. So I invite Motika ji to introduce Mr. Niranjan. So you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jamil ji.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. Niranjan Takle here. He is an electronics engineer by qualification, but has been a journalist for over 21 years. He has worked in a very array of print and visual media, from CNN, IBN Lokmat, Sahara Samay to The Week. The Week is an online news portal. He is majorly known for his groundbreaking investigative journalism, the prominent being mysterious death of Judge Loya, where he broke the news of Judge Loya's death. He has done investigative story on infamous Kopadi case about an alleged murder and rape of a minor girl. He did an investigative story on B.D. Savarkar, A Lamb, Lion Eyes. He did something really massive. He took same 14,432 kilometer of journey that Gandhiji did after coming to India, after returning to India, and he traveled in a general compartment of a train to understand and experience India after 100 years. He did an expose on Anna Hazare and his associates during the protests of IAC in Delhi with a story named Shady Company. He did an investigative story for which the story got an award, Onion Mafia, on who controls the entire onion market in India. He did Unwanted Indians, where he spoke about Indian prisoners languishing in Pakistani jails for years, after which a case was filed in Lahore High Court, and subsequently 59 such Indian prisoners were released. He did another investigative story on illegal mining scam in Goa, which was covered by the name Going, Goan, Gone. He was able to extract transcripts of video from laptop of Dayanand Pandey, who was an accused in the Malegaon blast. And he did another expose on corruption in slum rehabilitation projects. Other than these, he has done many stories in agrarian crisis, state politics, education, and cooperative sector in Maharashtra. So with that big span of his work, I'm sure we will be able to learn a lot more about press freedom in India from him.
Thank you, Motikaji, for that introduction. Now I invite Mr. Raju Rajgopal.
It gives me great pleasure to invite Kalpana ji to this
Kalpana
call.
Sharma.
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It gives me great pleasure to invite Kalpana ji today. She's an independent journalist, columnist, and author based in Mumbai. In almost 5 decades as a journalist specializing in developmental and environmental issues as well as gender, she has worked with Himmat Weekly, Indian Express, the Times of India, and the Hindu. She was also consulting editor with Economic and Political Weekly and readers editor with Scroll. Her column on gender, The Other Half, ran for 30 years, first in Indian Express and then in the Hindu. Currently, she writes a media column in newslaundry.com and a gender column in Mathrubhumi. Her latest book is The Silence and the Storm, Narratives of Violence Against Women in India. She's also the author of Rediscovering Dharavi, Stories from Asia's Largest Slum. In recent months, in her News Laundry column, she has been focusing on the assault on free media in India, and she's written extensively about it. I would urge you all to look into that website for her extensive views on that. Just a couple of quotes, recent quotes from her columns in News Laundry. Stalked by coronavirus, hounded by the state, losing jobs. Is nobody looking out for Indian journalists? The post-pandemic media scene is grim, with fewer jobs and shrinking spaces to report without fear. Coronavirus is also a crisis for Indian media, but it is also a chance at redemption. So I hope she can elaborate on some of these themes as we go through this. Welcome, Kalpana ji, to this forum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raju ji, for that introduction. Now I want to bring Sunita ji, who is the co-founder for Hindu, who is going to moderate our call and keep the flow. Sunita Vishwanath ji has been very active in US, highlighting various issues. Most of the audience are familiar with her work, and she is one of our core team member, guiding us and playing an important role in bringing about the topics of interest. So with that brief introduction, without much ado, and then Mr. Niranjan Takle ji is going to speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and Mrs. Kalpana Sharma ji for another 15 minutes, and then Sunita Vishwanath go in the background. Mrs. Sunita Vishwanath ji, please give your introductory remarks.
Namaste, everyone, especially Kalpana ji, Niranjan ji. I was so fortunate to meet you, Kalpana, in Panchgani, and and Giri from Hindus for Human Rights was there, and we had some wonderful, really moving, unforgettable conversation with you. And I also met Niranjan ji in Washington D.C. And I'm just inspired by both of you, your courage in reporting, and you really, my two sons want to be journalists, and I was telling them about both of you and the idea that journalism is nothing other than seeking the truth, and you both have devoted your lives to that with great courage, and we're honored to have you here. And I will let you guys take back the podium.
So you can unmute, Mr. Niranjanji, you can unmute yourself and you can go ahead.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, and I genuinely feel very honored to be a part of this conversation. Start with, I would say that yes, definitely there is a huge risk to the freedom of press. Every possible effort is being made to curtail that freedom of expression, freedom of press. We call it freedom of speech or freedom of expression in India. And I would put it this way, that yes, there is a freedom to express, but once you express it, you will not be sure of having freedom after you express it. So that's how the situation has been in India. For example, I would like to remind everybody that we had to lose one of our very strong voice among journalists in India, Gauri Lankesh, who was killed in front of her house for speaking her mind, for speaking the truth, for questioning the people in power. And she was possibly one of the most prominent journalists who got killed. But after that, we have seen, senior editors like Punya Prasoon Vajpayee or Hisar Sharma losing their jobs just because they tried to speak truth to the power. I also have a report, actually, recently published by the Committee for Protection of Journalists, CPJ, in India. And I'll just explain a small list that can possibly explain the enormity of the problem. For example, two journalists from Varanasi, Prime Ministers of India's constituency, Uday Vinit and Manish Mishra of Janasandesh Times, they did a story immediately after the lockdown was called in India after the coronavirus. They wrote about a tribe in Varanasi which didn't have food, and the children had to eat grass. Now the district magistrate of Varanasi threatened them with legal action and asked them to apologize within 24 hours or threatened to take the legal action. Now the legal action has been taken against both the journalists. We also know for a fact that Siddharth Vardarajan, the senior editor of and founder of The Wire, he has been sued for defamation for reporting what Yogi Adityanath, the Ajay Bisht, his original name. And actually, I must remind that a reporter from Uttar Pradesh was also sued for calling Yogi Adityanath as Ajay Bisht, which is his original name. And but even Wire has been sued for defamation. Santosh Jaiswal from Azamgarh of Janasandesh Times, a journalist, he reported about students being forced to clean school, and he was arrested for doing that. Pawan Jaiswal from Mirzapur, he did a report on how a particular school was serving food which was below the standards stipulated by the state government. He was also arrested. A Nation Live reporter, Nation Live is a news channel in India, and that reporter and a freelancer from Lucknow, they were arrested for attempting to incite violence by defaming the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. for defaming. That's how he was arrested for. A journalist from News 24 news channel from Shamal district. He was detained, he was hit, kicked, stripped, and urinated in mouth by the railway police for doing a story against a land mafia in Shamal district. Bachcha Gupta, a reporter, photojournalist from Varanasi, who works for Swatantra Chetna, a local newspaper there, he had taken pictures of students being forced to clean a flood-affected police station. He was charged with trespassing and criminal conspiracy, and he was arrested. Akash Yadav and 5 journalists of Dainik Bhaskar had reported about a hospital being run by unqualified bogus degree holder doctors. Now, all those 6 reporters were charged with robbery and sexual harassment. Now, they had reported about a hospital being run by bogus degree holders. We have this tremendous problem. I mean, bogus degree holders now have reached the Parliament of India. And writing about it has become a crime. Manoj Kumar Soni of Dainik Perfect Mission, he had reported on land mafia and he was beaten up by iron rods. His both knees were broken. Rajesh Mishra was shot dead few days after Yogi Adityanath became Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh during its first term. And till today, no trial has begun. Now, this has been, these are the examples of how journalists have been targeted for writing truth. I mean, my personal experience about this, curtailing freedom of expression or threatening it was after I did my story on Savarkar. Actually, what had happened is local Shiv Sena MP had demanded to the Prime Minister of India that Savarkar should be conferred with Bharat Ratna. And I thought that it was the appropriate time to revisit the history. And I went everywhere. I gathered almost 21,000 documents from several archives, from Nehru Memorial Library, from National Archives in Delhi, from National Library in Kolkata, from the cellular jail records, from the Indian Archives in London. And I did a story after that. It was titled "A Lamb Lionized," and that title itself had angered the entire right wing. I call them as Bhakta Sampradaya, and they started abusing me. They started trolling me. They started threatening my daughter with rape. They started threatening my wife after that. So that was my first-hand experience after doing that story on Savarkar. The second, of course, everybody knows it was after I broke the story on Judge Loya. It was a 38-part story, out of which 23 have got published. And after that, of course, everybody knew that a proxy or a fake petition was filed. But it was, I had to lose my job. And of course, my phone was tapped constantly. My emails were hacked. Till date, I do not get a single email which is unread on my Gmail account. Not a single email on which is unread. And this trolling, tapping, and everything, threatening. There were attempts made to throw acid on my daughter's face. There were attacks on my family members. And yes, of course, I was expecting mainstream media to support that particular story or at least take it forward. Not a single mainstream media from India, neither a news channel or a newspaper, even newspaper which calls itself with a slogan as journalism of courage, they tried to discredit the entire investigation. So that has been the experience. And many people did stories on my unemployment also, but nobody came forward to support me or any journalist working like that. I genuinely feel that it is the requirement of today's times that we need more and more investigative reports, more and more investigative journalism. Recently, the Supreme Court of India gave an order, and it said, and it made it mandatory for the news organizations in India to report whatever the government says, the government version about the COVID-19 pandemic. And it also said that we don't want to interfere into the freedom of press, but we direct the news organizations to carry the official version of the government. That clearly means, that's itself is, an operative part, but we direct is an operative part of mentioned by the Supreme Court, and it makes it mandatory for the organizations not to do the fact checking, not to do the ground reporting, and just carry with whatever the government says. It also blamed the news organizations for the migration that was happening. The migrant laborers were returning to their homes, their states, just because everybody in such situation of crisis wants to be in their own comfort zone. And that's the reason they didn't have food, they didn't have employment, they didn't have money, they wanted to return to their places. But there was no adequate arrangement made by the government, and they tried to do it. And when there are organizations which reported about this huge migration, the Supreme Court of India makes it mandatory for the news organization, calling it as fake news. That was the defense given by the government of India, that because of the fake news, the migration started. And that is the reason why Supreme Court said that because of this fake news, the migration is happening, and stop reporting like that. You have to carry the official versions of the government. So this is the situation where the freedom of expression, freedom of praise has come to in India. And apart from that, we have seen experiences where reporters like Rana Ayub was trolled in the filthiest possible language on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and elsewhere also. And there are a number of reporters, which I also know. They regularly get such filthy calls. I used to get such calls. And this is the situation. But I'm confident that hate, definitely there is an environment of widespread hatred across the country, hatred based on religious discriminations. And but hate has a certain expiry date. It brings fatigue to anybody. So hate has a date. Hate has an expiry date. It is love, peace, democracy, brotherhood, fraternity, and non-violence, which are the timeless values. And definitely there will be a time when all these values will again be the part of the mandate that the entire news organizations and the media and the press will probably enjoy. But present situation is such that we have to face this hatred, we have to face this discrimination, we have to face these attempts to curtail freedom of expression. Thank you. I think Sunita or Mutika can...
So thank you, Niranjanji, for that brief overview of the current status. I would like to invite Mrs. Kalpana Sharma ji to go ahead and unmute and then start your presentation. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, and thank you also for inviting me to be part of this important discussion on the freedom of the press in India. A discussion that we should actually have much more within India also. But I'm glad that we are reaching out to people outside. I also hope that what Niranjan says about hate having an expiry date is something that will happen, and is something optimistic that we can certainly hang on to at these dire times. But I'd like to just step back a little bit, because I think to try and understand why we have reached this pass as far as the press is concerned in India, or the media is concerned, I think we have to understand that all along, even though we have some rights within the constitution, there have been both internal threats, as in the way in which the media is structured, and external in the sense of the state and the whole corporate sector which has grown and the threat they pose. So I think we have to see that within that light, so that it's not just the individuals which are important, but it is these larger structures that also have to be tackled, because we can masquerade as a democracy and then still have these constraints that actually work to change the nature of the media. So, one of the, in the last few years, many times there's talk of an undeclared emergency. Now, some of us have actually lived through the time when India was under emergency. I was with Himmat Vikti, Gandhi is also here on this. And so we know what an actual state of emergency is about and what actual press censorship is about. But in many ways, I would say, even having lived through those 20 months and worked with a journal where we managed to continue publishing, that the undeclared emergency of today is much more insidious. And I'll explain to you why I think that. Because I think what has happened is, since the 90s and liberalization, the media, the nature of the media in India has changed. That it has become corporatized, and each media house has become a profit center. So news is not news anymore. It's what sells is news. And what began in the 90s in the print media, with the increasing tabloidization of even broadsheet newspapers, has now turned into this bizarre way in which news are presented on television, which is truly scary for anyone who wants to think of the future of information in this country. But behind it all is the fact that the nature of news, the nature of the media has changed, and it has become a saleable commodity now. And it is controlled by people as it was earlier, but people who are much more beholden to the government in power. And if the government in power chooses to step on their toes, they fall in line much more quickly than earlier, when there were also private owners of media houses that resisted. So the journalism courage, for instance, which Indian Express has, we may mock it now, but the fact is, at that point, someone like Raghunath Goenka did stand up, to Mrs. Gandhi's similar attempts at trying to get the media to fall in line. What is even more dangerous is, unlike the US, for instance, in India, we don't have any laws that prevent the consolidation of cross-media ownership. So increasingly now, we are getting these 3 or 4 really large media houses that have a presence both in print and in television, not so much in radio, because news and radio is yet not permitted, and then even in the digital space. So once you get this consolidation, then you have a manner in which news can be truly controlled on all platforms. Again, similar to the time of the emergency, I think what stands out today is that in the emergency, it was the smaller papers, the independent papers, who had the courage to speak out, because they were not beholden to the government for its largesse, or for permissions for some other work that they had to do. Similarly, today, I would say that the digital media, digital platforms that have come up, are the equivalent of those small journals and independent magazines that are providing this space. So I think if we understand that, then we will see that the kind of government we have, like the one we have today, is able to actually use both. It is able to use the structure of the media and the consolidation and the fact that there are few major corporate houses that actually own the most powerful media, especially television, and the fact that they are also, on the other hand, able to use specific laws to intimidate those that remain independent. So Niranjan talked about criminal defamation. Criminal defamation is a law that has been used now increasingly to try and get media to fall in line and journalists to fall in line. And it's, as much as the law is oppressive, it is the process of filing a case and getting a small independent digital platform like The Wire, for instance, to hire lawyers and to fight it. That is the real punishment, regardless of what happens in the end with the case. And now I think what is even more frightening, that criminal defamation has been a story that has been there for some time. As I said, the process of control of the media through the corporate sector, which is beholden to the government, is also something that has been a process. What I think is a really worrying factor now is the use of an oppressive law like the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which was amended so that it's not just against terrorist groups, but individuals can be called terrorists. This law has now been used in Kashmir against two journalists, one of them who's a young woman, a brave young woman who's a photojournalist, which is remarkable in Kashmir, Masrat Zehra, and Gohar Gilani, who is a well-known and senior journalist, who both of them have been slapped on with UAPA because of something they posted on Facebook. Now, I think that is a progression that we should really worry about, because UAPA, you cannot get bail. These people can be just put behind bars, and the trial can just never take place. And so if journalists know that the government now has powers to do this, they're doing it in Kashmir, they can do it anywhere else. Right now, we're in like a state of emergency because of the COVID crisis. It can be used, against any journalist. It's that threat, the sword hanging over your head, and the fact that you work with organizations that don't back you up anymore, which, as I said, are beholden to the government, or the government is able to step on their toes to the point that they fall in line. That is the thing that makes the job of an independent journalist, somebody who really wants to speak truth to power, somebody who's been trained to question, to be skeptical, to investigate the way Niranjan and others have done. It makes their job that much more difficult. And in the long term, I would say, again, from my experience of the emergency, I think freedom of the press was something that the middle class was not at all interested in. They were not bothered. They were quite happy that trains were running on time, and many of them supported Mrs. Gandhi. The people who really valued a free press and whose stories were never told during that period were the poorest, because they were the ones who slums were being demolished, sterilization was being conducted in the most horrific way through camps on women and men, and these stories could never be reported. They only came out after the emergency. And we're seeing a similar pattern now with the COVID crisis. So again, the stories of, as Niranjan again mentioned, about the migrant labor, the fact that these men and women are holding up our cities, and a lockdown is announced without giving them the time to think through what they're going to do, without any food, without any salary, without any way of getting back even to their own homes, is such a heartless thing. And the media houses that actually did report it, you then have the Supreme Court saying this is fake news. To me, this is really frightening, because it means there are two things that's going to happen. On the one hand, you're going to have the official version, as also now endorsed by the Supreme Court and pushed by this government. On the other hand, you invisibilize, you literally, you obliterate a whole part of India which is suffering from the policies of this government, and which are getting compounded by the particular crisis that we're facing right now with COVID. And that to me is truly frightening. And all this under this camouflage, under this pretense that we're still a democracy and we still have freedom of the press, So I think it's you have to penetrate this fog of disinformation and try and figure out how to do it. And finally, I'll say that I think the hope lies still in the smaller, more independent spaces that are there. And thanks to the internet, those spaces are still there, under immense pressure, both financially and from the government. But I think if we can find ways of supporting and nurturing these, then I think we will find the ways to get this information out of what is really happening in this country, and not allow a narrative that is both divisive and which is untrue to be the dominant narrative. So I'll stop there and look forward to questions.
So Sunita ji, please unmute and open up your video and lead the call with Sunita ji.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kalpana ji, Niranjan ji. These are ideas, thoughts that are so scary, and we are, most of us are away from India, where I'm in the States, in Brooklyn, and many of in all of these three organizations, most of our leadership is outside India. And so I'll open up. All of you can ask your questions in the chat box on Zoom. So please post your questions there. We can also unmute you, I think, to ask your question if you want to do that. You can, I think you can raise your hand. There's a way that you can raise your hand to let us know that you want to ask a question.
So I invite Mr. Raju Rajgopalji. You can ask the Google Sheet questions. Mr. Rajuji here. You can unmute if you are there, and you can ask your questions which you posted in the Google Sheet. Mr. Rajuji.
And let me just jump in and ask a first question. Just based on what both of our speakers have said, there's just such an immense pressure on anyone who is in the field of journalism right now with threats to literally your lives. Can you each speak to how you have managed to continue to speak up under such pressure? Each one of you. How do you weigh the danger with the need of the hour of telling the truth of what's going on? Kalpana ji.
I think this kind of these physical threats, what you've talked about, is faced much more by people who are in reporting. In journalism, there are many different things, and Niranjan has been one of those who's doing investigative reporting, and I think they are the most vulnerable. But I think even for people who do commentaries or interpretive things, editing, things that I have done, the spaces for writing, the kind of things that tell what we believe is the truth or expose what we believe needs to be exposed are shrinking. So there is no space to write. Basically, even the op-eds of the good newspapers, as I call them, the ones that were open, are swamped now with officials writing it. And I think many of these newspapers play a balancing game by giving space to ministers and party spokespersons and so on, so that they can then do their other work of reporting. But then what happens is that in the 80s, I remember at the height of the women's movement, for instance, I was with the Indian Express. The op-ed pages were open to women writing on the issues that concerned us because the editor recognized that this was an important issue that everybody should hear about. It should not be just, it's not just the women's movements, it's a societal issue that needs to be addressed. So gender was integrated into mainstream comment. It was not something on the side in the magazine sections. But now, to write on gender, to write on anything on a human rights issue, on Kashmir, as I said, so little comment on these three journalists, including the correspondent of the Hindu, who has been, a case has been filed against. And the journalists there say that this has gone on for a long time, but since the 5th of August and the abrogation of Article 370, they are constantly being summoned and asked who their sources are and bullied, and the journalists cannot function like this. And that is happening in Kashmir, but it's a reflection on what is happening everywhere now. So many journalists who would even like to do this are holding back. There's a kind of self-censorship that takes place. And even if you do an expose, where do you publish? That is a big question for many journalists. And younger journalists who are really as idealistic as all of us were when we entered the profession, it's really difficult for them, that they're not getting that kind of encouragement either from their seniors, no backing from their media organizations, and no guarantee that if they do get into any trouble, they will have the backup, and they have no guarantee at all now. So therefore, why should any young upcoming journalist risk her life to do this?
Niranjan, do you want to answer that question?
Niranjan ji, please unmute yourself. Mr. Niranjan ji, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, please unmuted now.
After doing my engineering, I was attracted towards journalism because I came across a sentence, and I was reading book, and it said that the responsibility of a journalist is to tell the truth and shame the devil. And it actually attracted me to the profession. It was in the late 90s, 1998 precisely, that I actually switched my career to journalism. And I thought that because after the demolition of Babri Mosque and everything, the complete social fabric had changed. And even my friends who were Muslim, they were afraid of talking to me. And I thought that this is not the environment that I was brought up in. I was brought up in an extremely healthy and cohesive atmosphere. We never thought about caste and religions and all the discriminations on those lines. And is this the kind of environment that I should give to my daughter? And if not, then I should be a part of making some change. And so I thought about joining this profession, and I came to journalism. And in fact, that is precisely the thought that keeps me going. In fact, I would like to mention here that I had done a story on. I had lived as Rafiq Qureshi, cattle trader in Gujarat and Rajasthan for over 4 months. And I used to buy cattle from Rajasthan, transport it to Gujarat, sell it across the slaughterhouses, and record how Bajrang Dal extorts money. And I released everything in the Constitution Club of India in the month of March last year, before the parliament elections. But nobody carried that particular news. And that says what the freedom the press really has. As Kalpana ji rightly mentioned, that after abrogation of Article 370, everybody in the mainstream media has refused to look at the problems and the sufferings that the people in Kashmir are going through. And it is 267 days. Every single house has turned into a prison. Initially, the entire discussion and debate about NRC and CAA helped them to divert the attention. And now it's COVID-19, which is helping the government to again divert the attention. The journalists have got arrested in Kashmir, but there has not been a very serious reporting about what is actually going on there, especially in the mainstream media, I would say. And there are number of restrictions on who can travel to Kashmir, who can go to Kashmir. The sources are verified, the sources are checked. If journalists are questioned about their everyday visits, wherever they go in, if at all they go to Kashmir. So that's the situation. But again, I would say that it's this, as Kalpana ji said, that even the young journalists today who are joining the profession, they also are want to do a value-based journalism. But again, there is a limitation of space. There is no space available. I was offered to write a book on the murder of Judge Loya, but 3 days before handing over the manuscript, the publisher wrote to me that they won't be able to publish it. Now I don't have a publisher for 1.5 years. So this is the situation, that at every stage, whether you want to write in print media, whether you want to report in the broadcast media or the web, everywhere you will find these obstacles, hurdles, pressures, and intimidation. And this is the situation. But we will have to take help and innovate ourselves. And I always think that I strongly believe in Gandhiji, and the way he had innovated the entire mass movement. Even the journalists will have to innovate and find out ways to tell the truth to the people and shame the devils.
Sunita, unmute yourself.
Yes. Raju, do you want to ask a question next from your list?
Yeah. couple of questions. You can address them now or in the course of answering other questions. To me, it seems like more insidious than the direct government intervention is the self-censorship by a lot of the media. I think you already indirectly touched on it, but if you want to elaborate on that, please do so. The other thing that maybe should come at the end of the discussion, but I'll pop the question anyway. In the age of the internet, is there a way we can serve Indian journalists get their stories out that are not getting out in India by organizing ourselves better in the NRI community and create a space for journalists Niranjan ji like yourself and Kalpana ji yourself to try to get the story out. And this is something if you want to address. So those are the two main questions I had. So I'll stop there. If you wish to answer now or later, that's fine. Thank you.
So yeah, you can take those questions, Mr. Niranjan ji. You can unmute or Mrs. Kalpana ji. Any take on those questions? Yeah. To unmute.
I'll just say about. Can I say that about the self-censorship that Rajuji raised?
Okay, so
yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say about the way this kind of consolidation of ownership, cross-media ownership, has actually led to this situation where the owners of the media houses are so worried about the government and what the government could do in terms of their other interests, economic interests, that they prefer that their publications and their television channels do not cross certain lines. Now, these lines are not, it's not as if there are diktats that are sent out, but generally it gets to be known in the newsroom that certain kind of stories will not be welcome. And that's the kind of self-censorship that does take place. And you only know it by the absences of certain aspects that are not covered. And you also know it by especially in television, by the deliberate bias that comes in, and we've seen this deterioration of Indian television news over the last, I would say, especially the last 5-10 years, where there's no news anymore. It's only opinion and it's only shouting. And it's truly dangerous. The largest viewed channels are whipping up, prejudice, are whipping up anti-Muslim fervor in a very deliberate way by taking a news spec and distorting it. And this cannot happen with individual anchors. This is a policy of the media house that leads to this. And I think that this is why we have to understand this larger structure, that these things don't happen in a vacuum. It happens when the state and certain interests, economic interests, coalesce and decide that they're going to work together. And for them, freedom of the press, frankly, is not important. It's how you use information to further your goals, whether they're political or economic. That is where the media comes in.
Thank you. Niranjan ji, can you comment on? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, with a court directive, with the recent, as I mentioned, the recent court directive given by the Supreme Court, asking news organizations to carry only the government's version about this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, this is something which will encourage self-censorship. And media houses, the editors will be compelled to kill the original, real, genuine ground reporting, but and they will be forced to carry only the government's version. And it is authenticated by the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has clearly, directly intervened in the freedom of press with that directive.
So let me echo the question that Raju just asked, because it's also in another question here. The role of your friends abroad, Indians like us who are abroad, what can we do generally to give support and give voice to the concerns that you're raising, and specifically Raju's idea of concrete ways to get stories out when they're killed in India. Can you speak to the role of the NRI community?
See, sorry, Kalpana ji, go ahead.
No, I've got two specific suggestions. I mean, frankly, this particular government, I don't think they care two hoots about what's written outside India. Once in a while, maybe they're disturbed, but I don't think it really bothers them because they know that they've got their support base in India. So even if any of us writes, anything we want published outside, unless it finds an echo inside, I don't know whether politically it will have an impact. But I think, as I said earlier, I think support for the independent, smaller media that is there, and smaller I only say because they're digital and they're not beholden to a media house. I think any kind of support in terms of subscriptions, and I think this is going to be very essential for the future because the future is digital. And in fact, right now, because of the COVID crisis, print media is going through literally, I mean, it could be death throes, because newspapers have not been able to publish. They are not printing. They've been reduced to 12 pages. Advertising is drying up, and it's not going to come back given the state of the economy. Journalists have been asked to take pay cuts, to go on leave without pay, and already retrenchments have started. So even in economic terms, it's actually a very dire situation. And within that, the only hope is these smaller independent spaces like The Wire, Scroll, News Minute, News Laundry, Caravan, that are actually able to still put something out. So I think it's very important to find ways to support and help these spaces to grow because they reach out everywhere. And they must be in the Indian languages also. And secondly, let me say, just on the economic issue, I think we have to realize that for investigative writing, Niranjan will be able to explain that better. But, as a freelancer, if you don't have the backing of some economic support, it's very difficult to conduct an investigative reporting. Even if you're within a newspaper, unless your newspaper backs you financially to actually go and do that report, there's no way, however idealistic or committed a reporter may be within mainstream media, that she or he can actually do this. And the economic crunch means that newspapers are now going to put less and less money into news gathering, which is, in a way, the bones of a news organization. And they're going to fill it with secondary information coming from other sources, and fill their pages with that. So the whole nature of the information that we're getting now, which is still dependent on your reporter who's got feet on the ground, who's going out there getting the information, that is going to change. And I think, as I said, that is really something that worries me because it changes your understanding of what's going on in your country if the people who are the building blocks of creating that information are not being given resources to go out and find that information. So I think the community outside who cares about what is happening in India should find ways of supporting every independent organization that is still there, that is still able to report. And I've named some of them, there may be others. But these are the things that I think we must nurture and we must support.
Thanks. I'm going to go through the list of questions that our people who are with us have posted on chat. And one or both of you can answer each one because then there's other questions on other forums too. Iqbal Mohiuddin has said, in current times, press is causing communal disharmony through fake news. Any steps or plans to control this by media associations? And let me add, do you have advice for if any of our organizations can help counter these press-controlled fake news, memes and things?
See, about this particular thing, I would like to say here that the fake news spreads, fake news makes an impact because the mainstream media does not rebut it. The mainstream media does not counter it. And that is the reason why fake news gets alive. It is the responsibility of mainstream media to say that this particular thing is a rumor, it is a fake, it is hoax. but that's not happening. There are hardly 2 or 3 websites in India like Alt News run by Pratik Sinha or boomlive.com which is edited by Jency Jacob. They are the ones who are doing this fact checking. So that's the reason why fake news is spreading rampantly. People are taking help of that fake news to spread hatred further. What we saw the other day with Arnab Goswami, the entire verbal diarrhea that people had to listen to. It was, there was not a single question. It was a complete ranting and number of allegations, complete wild imagination of allegations. And when he is questioned for spreading that kind of hatred, he says that I questioned a particular leader, and because I questioned that particular leader, I was harassed by the police department. That cannot be a defense. There was not a single question. It was all allegations. But it happens because of this fake news. It's not countered by the mainstream media. On that particular day when this Arnab was ranting all these things, there was not a single channel which was countering it. There was not a single news report which countered it. And that's the reason why it survives. So, as for you, as you mentioned, you can. One of my friend had actually suggested that these defamation cases are filed. We met Sunita ji in Washington DC on the 4th of December. On the 10th of December, a defamation case was filed against me in a court in Mumbai for a story which I had done 4 years ago on Savarkar. So on the 10th of December, that case was filed and a warrant was issued by the court. So defamation cases, it has become a tool to silence the voices of dissent, silence the people who are trying to tell the truth. But if you can create an alternative media in the United States and take the real stories and publish it there, then possibly, I don't know about this jurisdiction things, but then possibly the jurisdiction will not apply and the people here will not be able to file frivolous defamation suits.
Right. Okay. The next question is from. Oh, do you want to speak, Kalpana ji? Did you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to add to this thing that, even though there are things like the Press Council of India and there's the National Broadcasters Association, now and there's a law against hate speech. So basically what people like Arnab and others have been doing is just pure hate speech to stir up hatred against a community. And, they should be prosecuted under those laws. These organizations that represent the media should not tolerate this, should be issuing statements. Instead, what happens is Committee to Protect Journalists and all of us, Network of Women in Media, and so on, all of us issue statements against what is happening. But the official bodies that are there to actually hold up the media to certain standards is not doing anything for the same reason that I've explained. They're all part of that same establishment. Yeah.
Right. The next question is from Imtiazuddin. Dissent and journalistic independence are under serious threat in India these days. It's the same question, really. It's what can we do from here to protect? So we've already addressed that. Let's see. Iqbal Mohiuddin again. Why is professional journalism silent on biased journalism? Why are journalists not taking up fake media? We've already. Let me just look at these before I ask them. We've addressed that. Pallavi Sapre says, I've heard so many times that this is not a right way to declare lockdown. But then I agree with that. But then what would be the right way? I guess she means on the one hand, protecting the economic needs of the poorest in India, and on the other hand, not spreading this highly contagious novel virus. Do you have either of you want to address that question?
Yeah, so I think there has been quite a bit of discussion on this. Um, and the humane way to have done this lockdown is to give time to the people who would be most affected. I cannot imagine that a government did not know that there are millions of migrant workers who live on daily wages and who would be completely put out of, they would not have any means of sustenance if you declare a lockdown for a month or longer. And now they've organized trains to take them. Why couldn't this have been done earlier? It's inexplicable. And not only that, they're being asked to pay to go home. And the PM, there's some PM Cares Fund where the crores of rupees have been raised. This is what the fund ought to have been used for, to send these people home. I mean, it is so atrocious that this kind of thing is happening, all under the agent of saying, we are going to protect you from this disease. But these poor men and women are dying of hunger and starvation. There have been so many stories of people who died because they started walking and they died on the way. Children are dying. A 12-year-old girl died. I mean, each story is more heartbreaking than the other. One man reaches his home and dies after he's put into confinement for 14 days, and he vomits as soon as he gets there because obviously he's not eaten and he's been exposed to the heat. So what kind of government do they care at all for people? It's just, to me, it's atrocious. And so, nobody's saying that lockdown, I mean, you can argue about how long a lockdown will actually affect, change, the situation here. There's lots of debate. But the point is that if you're going to follow a strategy like this, think of the weakest person and see how they're going to survive it and then plan accordingly. And this was just not done. It was done for drama and convenience, and you just announce it at 8 o'clock at night. And by midnight, you expect people to be ready to have nothing available for them. The middle class rushed out and stocked up on things. And poor people who live literally buying every day what they need for the next meal, even in a city like Mumbai, had nothing on their hands at the end of the day. So to me, this has been, I mean, if anything we remember about these days that we're going through, it's not going to be the disease, it's going to be the heartlessness of government policy that has allowed literally millions of our people who, as I said, hold up our cities to be treated in the way they have been.
Let me ask you a question. From where we're reading about the news from a distance, but most of us have family and friends and colleagues in India, and we're hearing ground reports constantly all the time. And it's disturbing no matter whichever constitutional right you think of, there seems to be a huge assault on it, and it seems like a complete crisis of rights, human rights, and and constitutional rights in India. And I've heard various advocates begin to talk of advocating for sanctions. Do you think that's too far? Sanctions against India? Do you think that's taking it too far? What would be your response to advocacy organizations that are having conversations like that? Both of you.
I mean, sanctions against India based on what? On this sort of gradual process of communalization.
Yes, all of it. And this is a part of it. When you take away the freedom of expression, that's such a huge backbone of any democracy. This would be most certainly a part of it.
But the thing is, I mean, they haven't taken away the freedom of expression.
Right.
Yeah, officially it's still there. It's the manner in which this is being manipulated, including this COVID crisis, where, for instance, they've got this app called Arogya Setu, and now they've said every employer has to insist that any worker or person who comes to their office has to download this app. I mean, the phone is my private property.
Yeah.
The government will not tell me that I must have this app or that app. It's up to me. But they're using this thing to basically now centralize more and more powers. And I don't know whether, frankly, economic sanctions, because then nationalism will be whipped up.
Yeah.
And again, there'll be an enemy.
And the poor will suffer.
Interfere. India is a proud nation and so on. So frankly, in my view, I don't think that kind of thing always works for the benefit of the people who are living in this country.
Niranjan ji,
Let me add one thing here. I mean, the Constitution of India clearly says that maintaining communal harmony and encouraging scientific rationale is a constitutional duty of every Indian. Now we have examples of political leaders, news houses, and news anchors spreading hatred, completely destroying this communal harmony. We also have political leaders like Sumitra Mahajan, who was the head of the parliament. She talks about doing a Mahamrityunjay jab to defeat COVID-19. This is completely, this is an attempt to kill this scientific rationale, which has been going on very systematically. I mean, many people laugh at it when these people talk about this nonsense, but it's not a matter of laughing. It's a systematic attempt of killing scientific rationale. And right from the Prime Minister of India to Sumitra Mahajan, everybody has been indulged into it, of killing this scientific rationale. Now, this is clearly against the Constitution. I have filed a complaint against what Sumitra Mahajan said. I want to see what the concerned police department and the officials and the government will do about it. But now there has to, I strongly feel that people in India will have to file several complaints at several places across India against such nonsense. Somebody comes up from Rajasthan and says that the sun is getting cold because number of people have started using solar panels. There has to be an action against this, and people will have to take lead in filing complaints against this. If at all I even say this, that there should be sanctions against all these things against India. Tomorrow I will be arrested for being an anti-national.
right.
And it has become a norm. It has become a new normalcy. So this particular battle has to be fought from within India, and I really hope that that time will come when people will realize that we will have to be proactive.
So I'm going to do a time check. It's 12:15. We have many questions that are not on chat that Jamil Bhai has. And there are two more questions here in chat. Jamil Bhai, should I ask these or do you want to? I should ask them. Okay. So, and let's make these quick so we can move to the other list of questions. So first of all, Kapil Choksi says, NRIs can make a difference in at least two aspects for promoting press freedoms. One, monetary, and two, promoting adoption of technology. It can be used not just for surveillance, but also anonymous reporting. Apps like Signal have been used. So I guess it's a comment rather than a question, but if you have any response or a comment on this issue of NRIs making a difference by donating to independent publishing forums and promoting adoption of new technologies. Kapil Choksi is saying.
Yeah, I just want to tell about technology. So I was concerned about how people's Gmail was being read and how they were not confident that their sources are confidential anymore. But there are technology solutions to that which do work in the current internet setup in India. For example, third-party encryption applications like Signal, and there are mail sites which like protonmail.com. So technology is a dual-edged sword. It can be used to fight against dissent as well. So I think probably the reporters in India are not aware of these. But if you look at US, there are news organizations like The Intercept, which have used these and popularized these applications, and they're pretty much foolproof. And another point about anonymity. So we are used to having, assuming that sources are anonymous in journalism, but I think the time is ripe where even the reporters and journalists will need to sacrifice their careers by adopting anonymity on online platforms. Thank you.
Do you, Kalpana ji, Niranjan ji, do you want to have any comment on those points raised by Kapil?
I am satisfied with proton mill. I mean, when we did the Judge Loya story, all the documentary evidences, video recordings, whatever, and even the story itself, everything was we used proton mill for that. I am not at all satisfied with Signal and other apps, because actually I get a complete log of how my phone is, kept under surveillance every day. And in that, I often get a log how many times my Signal was also, Signal app also was hacked. So I really don't know about it, but I don't get Proton in that. So I think Proton Mail is quite safe in that sense.
Okay. Final question from chat is from Narsing Namindla. We all know so much is happening for the last 5 to 6 years. Unless there is a political alternate, we cannot win this. Does the opposition of political parties, are they aware of this and trying to put up a political movement to expose the government?
Well, what can one say about that? At the moment, there seems to be no political opposition in India. There is, but they are not heard, and much of what they say is sometimes significant, but it's downplayed deliberately by the media also, even the things that are significant. But there's certainly no organized opposition of the kind that is needed to really make a change at the top. We still have 4 years to go, so maybe something will happen. But the way in which it's going, both the consolidation of political power at the base and the building up the personality cult of one person who rises above party and who seems to be, people will say, oh, all this is bad, but he is okay, this is the kind of argument you hear all the time. And even this COVID crisis is being used more and more to project him as this, larger than life figure who cares, speaks to you, and literally enters your home through television and tells you that he cares for you. So whatever hardship people are going through, ultimately they're told that, whatever it is, he cares for you, Modi cares for you. And I think that is a thing that's very difficult to confront. We've had it happen years ago with Mrs. Gandhi, who also became that kind of figure who was above everything else, and Mrs. Gandhi could do no wrong, and we are having this happening now with Modi. So to tell you the truth, I cannot predict at the moment whether we will have a political opposition that will be strong enough to make a difference, but you never know. These things change very dramatically sometimes, so we still have time. It could happen.
Niranjan ji, do you want to speak to this question?
I think we may have lost Niranjan ji. I don't see his.
No, he's on mute.
Okay.
Maybe Jamil Bhai, maybe start the rest of the questions.
So, thank you. I have some Google Sheet questions. Before going into that, it is an interesting fact. Both of you guys were very good and on current status here. I have a take on a couple of questions which I would put across both of you. We all understand there is one media house which runs the media. So is there any government ads or any policy taken at the government level which influences this media house owners to sway the public opinion to these anchors and journalists? That is part one of my question. Part two is, we have seen as an international observer of the political things, particularly in the neighboring countries, where there is a term called judicial activism. Do you foresee any journalist activism? That means whether the ethical journalists who remained in a small percentage can have a leadership to do this kind of a journalist activism against the media house owners who are infilled with the political pressure swaying the public opinion? Those are my two questions. If you guys can briefly answer that. Thank you. So Niranjan ji and Mrs. Kalpana ji.
Let Niranjan go first. Niranjan?
Kalpana ji can go.
Okay. Yeah, so your question, as I understood it, first you asked about government advertising, right? And what role it has in terms of influencing large media. So actually, the larger media houses are not so dependent on government advertising as some of the smaller ones, because they don't get enough of other advertising. So the large houses, the larger they are, the bigger TR they have, for instance, as a television, they will attract more of the private advertising also. The position that they take, I mean, we are talking specifically, say, about Republic TV, that's actually owned by a BJP, set up by Chandrasekhar. So the line they take is clearly something that will reflect whatever is the party line, and they position themselves to occupy that space, a bit like Fox News has done in the US. As far as Times Now is concerned, Times Now seems to wax and wane sometimes. And they set up another channel called Mirror Now, which was supposed to be a counter to Times Now, but it's still part of the same group. And from my own experience of working before Times of India, it's this philosophy that you occupy the entire space of the media. So within that, within your own media house, create all these different types of outlets that cover different perspectives. And as a result, because you have so much media, you also take in the value of the media. In other words, advertising, because you can give them special deals and you make sure that you suck up all the value of the media, which is what Times of India has managed to do very successfully. And as a result, become, Bennett Coleman is the largest media house in the country and has remained that for a long time. So, your government advertising, I don't think that has such a big role. It affects more the smaller papers. And the second issue of judicial activism and journalistic activism, there's separate ones. Journalistic activism has also become much more difficult now because of the fact that we don't have any unions anymore, very few unions. So even the kind of platforms that were there where journalists could get together and take on the owners are not available. Journalists are now not on permanent contracts, but are on time-bound contracts with most of their organizations where they've worked, which makes their own position very vulnerable. So unless they're willing to risk a job and quit, if they're pushed too far, you'll find most journalists just look out for themselves, So there are informal organizations who do speak out, but on the whole, in mainstream media, unlike, say, in the 70s, the 80s, when under the Working Journalists Act, all of us were sure that we could not be dismissed unless your owner could show cause why you should be dismissed, and even that could be challenged in a court of law. There is no such protection now. So that also dilutes activism to a great extent.
I would like to mention here that the Network 18 group, which is taken over by Mukesh Ambani, the Z News group, the entire group of bouquet channels of Z News. The owner of that company is the Rajya Sabha member of Bharatiya Janata Party. Rajiv Chandrasekhar of Republic is a Rajya Sabha member of Parliament. ABP and as ma'am talked about Times Group, they are, I think, Vajpayee during his second term as Prime Minister had coined a word. He had said that we manage contradictions. So that is how I look at Times Now and the ABP group. They manage contradictions. They run Mirror Now and they run Times Now both. So they try to balance these things. About advertisement, government advertisements are extremely important for the local and regional newspapers or the regional medias. As Kalpana ji also mentioned, for bigger corporate houses like Network 18 or other organizations, the majority of the advertisement today are given by the biggest advertiser, in fact, on these channels is Patanjali, which is owned by Baba Ramdev. So everybody, I mean, all majority prime time shows are sponsored by Patanjali. So you can make out what kind of editorial line they must be discreetly forcing, probably. So this is how the advertisement scene is about in the mainstream media. About journalistic activism, recently after the two boys tried to throw ink on Arnab Goswami, Press Council of India had issued a letter, and in that letter they wrote a sentence which said that attacking a journalist for bad journalism is not a good sign. So they acknowledge that whatever he did was bad journalism. But the Press Council of India doesn't do anything about bad journalism. They talk only about throwing ink, but they don't talk about the bad journalism that the reporter or the particular organization does. So actually it is the Press Council of India or the Press Club of India or the Press Club of Mumbai who are supposed to take some stand and some position to maintain this freedom of press. But these are the organizations who appear to have surrendered to the dispensation in power. So that's the situation. So ultimately, it will be the individual journalists who are ready to sacrifice, in present circumstances, even sacrifice their lives, can bring about a change. And I hope that they will come.
So I guess, well said. I think it's very disappointing to know that these bodies are not able to clearly function within some rules and logistics of what that body was created. That answers the question from Muhammad Abdul Khalil from Saudi Arabia. He was also asking if any body exists, which you guys already answered, so I'm not going to go over his question. So the next question is, from Sharif. Baswaraj Sankin. He says that thanks for this wonderful initiative and meaningful discussion. In spite of 100 failures from economy to employment, why Indian media is not actively questioning the government or the state? So I guess you have touched base on those points earlier.
Jamil,
yes,
Anji wants to ask a question. He raised his hand.
Yes, so I guess that is already answered. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, you can unmute and you can please go ahead and unmute yourself.
So, am I being given a chance?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, it's not so much a question, I'm afraid, as a comment, if I'm allowed to make that short comment. I think what Kalpana and Niranjan have shared only confirms and informs us that the situation in India is even more serious, even more grim than some might have thought. It's not very pleasant news, but it's we must take that in. I think what we've heard also shows that people of great courage, clarity also exist in India, even if they may not always be so able to give their views, give their comments. So I want to say that we are encouraged and inspired by this fresh demonstration, both from Kalpana and from Niranjan, of the great clarity and courage that exists. And the last point I would like to make is that, as has been mentioned by others also, that those who are, for the moment, in the United States, but who still cherish India, who feel very Indian, who love India and want India's democracy to survive and to revive, that yes, sanctions, call for sanctions perhaps may not work, and whatever newspapers in America might write might not have an immediate impact in India. But I think the NRI community, even a handful among them, if they are serious about it and if they are innovative about it, I think already what Mr. Choksi mentioned about what can be done in terms of technology, but also in terms of, if need be, apart from supporting these very brave portals, these digital portals that exist in India, Kalpana listed some of them, those can be supported. But I think we should also not rule out the possibility, although it will take effort, that some gifted people who have both the technology and the convictions, the conviction of journalism, might not only support existing digital platforms, but if need be, even create a new digital platform which can be operated from here and which can continue and grow and can support what brave people, citizens, the needy people in India are already doing. So, obvious comments, but I'm grateful for the chance to share these comments.
So thank you, Mr. Raghavanji. We really appreciate your comments, giving some glimmer of hope amongst all the disappointments, from the media in India. So we as Indians are here to try to brainstorm and bring in journalists to encourage them and give us our part in it. So I have one more question from Mr. Sudhir Chowdhury. Before I ask that question, I want to ask a question which was posted in the WhatsApp group by our key member, Dr. Rehan, who represents International Society for Peace and Justice. He was airing some concern of the recent events when the news media channels openly spread, openly kind of instigated hate and bigotry with the Tablighi Jamaat incident. So he was asking, is there any way we all NRIs or anybody can file a complaint? And if you guys have any phone, fax, email of government agencies responsible for monitoring media, if you guys can share. So, and also if there is any solution to stop this kind of hatred promoted and then by the electronic media in particular. If you guys can give your opinion on this.
You want to answer? Well, the solution is change of government. If you have a government in power that actually perpetuates this hatred of one community, which this government has done consistently since 2014, there is no other solution, but they have actually institutionalized it now. And it's coming to you in all ways, from people who take the law into their own hands, to the judiciary, which seems to not be able to stand up, and to the media, which is actually enforcing practices. So it's a larger political battle fight. But within it, I think still, I do believe that there are laws on hate speech, there are laws governing the media, that we need to find ways of using whatever little freedom is available through the justice system to take these people to task and not let them get away. It's difficult because it involves time and money. So I don't know how many people are willing to invest that kind of thing, but it has to be done. I mean, there's no other way around it. And I think as many people can condemn and speak out against it, gives other people who are silent courage also to speak out.
So Niranjan ji, you want to
the recent examples that we had from United Arab Emirates, where when the Indian people who were employed in the UAE were tweeting and doing posts on Facebook and spreading communal hatred through that. So there were incidences when a few people complained to their employers. After searching for their profiles, they found out their employers, and they started complaining with the employers. And the employers started taking action against those Indians living in UAE for spreading bigotry and communal hatred. And then suddenly we saw Mohan Bhagwat addressing the entire nation that we have to behave responsibly, and there are people who are trying to spread hate. And he started talking about against the people who were spreading hatred. So probably there are, I know for a fact, Sunita ji also knows that there are a number of people in the United States as well who spread hatred and who try to damage the communal harmony in India. So probably you can keep a vigil and complain to their employers in the United States that your employee is trying to spread hatred and bigotry in India, back in India. So, and encourage them to take action against such morons. So probably that is something which which will help in at least curtailing this spread of hatred.
So thank you. I have another question from our team member, Manish Madanji from Global Indian Progressive Alliance. At the last moment, he has some, homely duty to perform, so that's why he couldn't make it. But he asked us to ask his question. If you guys want to respond, Manish Madanji represents Global Indian Progressive Alliance. He's a criminal justice, has a criminal justice background. So his question is, I don't know if you are part of and privy for the editorial guild, but his question is, how does the government respond when the journalist editorial guild write directly to the Ministry of Communication and Press Bureau of India to establish clarity and declining press freedoms? Has the editorial guild filed any PIL on this issue? So I guess Niranjan ji, if you want to take that question, if you are part of any editorial guild.
As far as I know, Editors Guild has not filed any public interest litigation. Neither it has written to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So that's what I know. Probably Kalpana ji will be in a better position to talk about it.
The Editors Guild it's not that Press Council of India is not an official body. In fact, it came together post-emergency because it was found that the established bodies like the Indian Newspaper Society and the Press Council were not standing up for press freedom. So they have taken up, for instance, they issued the Kashmiri journalists were arrested, and many times they have actually supporting individual journalists have been the subject of persecution. So, but it depends because it is it depends very much on who's there at the moment, who heads it, and who takes the initiative to intervene. It's not an official body. So they haven't gone to court.
So one last question from the Google Sheet I have here. I am not understanding this in particular. Maybe you guys will. It is from Sudhir Chowdhury. I don't know of any bill tabled in the Rajya Sabha and it is being on the speaker's table. He's asking if the journalist should brainstorm on this issue and take this bill up for discussion before this becomes an act. I am not aware of any bill. If you guys are aware of any bill related to the press Act or modification of the Press Act and current affairs with the press, you guys can comment. I didn't understood his question, but he was like asking whether we can take up that discussion as a journalist to put pressure on the, I guess, Rajya Sabha to modify the bill if there is any.
I have not heard of any such bill, very frankly speaking. And as far as I know, I mean, this particular government, during Vajpayee's time, there used to be a discussion about the need, the so-called need to amend the constitution, to have a constitution, some changes in the constitution of India. This is a government since 2014 which does not talk about such things. They simply bulldoze things. They don't care about the constitution. They don't care about the parliamentary norms or the precedents or the ethics. They try to bulldoze things. So I don't think they will bring a bill in the parliament to decide the scope of press freedom as such, but they will simply bulldoze it through the managements and the ownerships of the media houses.
And Mrs. Kalpana ji, are you want to take on this or? Okay. So the last question from my end is, would you see any curbs on the social media? Right now, press and electronic media being the fourth pillar, what we usually say offline, after acting bias and playing into the state, do you see in the near future any curbs on the social media by the government in power in India?
Definitely. There have been several attempts to, the government in fact tried to bring a bill in the parliament to monitor the entire social media activity of every single Indian. It's not only about the journalists. They wanted to monitor social media activities of every single Indian. Now, they want to force people to download, as Kalpana ji said, to download that particular Arogya Setu app. And that's how they want to monitor the movement of every single Indian. So they will try to force and bring restrictions on the usage of social media. Even during the COVID-19, there have been so many guidelines about what things the social media groups, the WhatsApp groups should follow. And they also, in fact, had specified that all the WhatsApp groups should be, restricted to posts by admin only, and ordinary members of that particular group will not be allowed to post anything. Otherwise, the admin of that particular group will be held responsible. So, all those things have happened, and they will try to do it. Definitely.
As far as journalists is concerned, I think I said earlier, the worrying aspect is the fact that journalists share things on social media, including what they write, their photographs, and these two cases against Gauhar Gilani and Zehra in Kashmir for posts that they had on social media. Must had posted her photograph because she posted journalist. So if that begins to happen, then I think journalists will be worried because media has provided them a platform to share things that perhaps they publish abroad or it doesn't get leverage within the country, and so they use it to get leverage of what they write. And if what they write is going to be monitored in this way, this is a way of intimidation that the government is already putting in place. And I think that is a thing for journalists to worry about. And this government will definitely find more of doing precisely that.
So I ask Sunita ji if you have any chat questions in 5 minutes, if we can wrap up, and then we'll open the floor for the audience for another 5 minutes, and then we will conclude the call. Sunita ji, if you have any chat questions which are not repetitive. In the meantime,
Eminent is going to monitor social media. Recently, a business deal was declared during pandemic between Facebook and Jio, which is owned by Ambani.
That's true.
Comment to go along with what you were saying. And then another comment from Kapil Choksi. Ideally, journalism should have an institutional strength that's immune to benevolence of political parties. Without that, even INC will suppress it given a chance. So we have those two questions. We have Pallavi Sapre asking about both of your books. So I shared the name of your book, Kalpana ji, and I said maybe all of us, our groups, can come together and support Niranjan ji in getting your book published. That would be a concrete thing we could do. So we'll talk about that later. But there's no other questions here.
Sure. So, having said that, I would invite, for the questions here. If you guys, I will open the floor now. So please raise your hand and open up your mic, and then you can go ahead and ask the question. Rajuji, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity before these questions to thank the guests for a very insightful presentation. Scary, insightful, gives us something to think over in terms of how we can help. But I also wanted to request the organizers, that include me. Looks like many people who wanted to get on this call were not able to do so for many reasons. So this is being recorded, and I hope we can make the Zoom recording available so people that would have very much liked to be with us can see it at their own leisure. I wanted to make that comment before I forget. Thanks to everybody that worked very hard on this. So thank you.
So if anybody else has, Motika or anybody from the audience, if you have a question, please raise your hand and be brief, because we are trying to wrap up. If it is a single liner question, I would probably encourage those instead of comments, because then the speaker has to answer and we are running short of time. So Dr. Rehan, I see that you raised your hand. Please go ahead and be specific.
Yes, thank you very much. This was a very, very informative session. About the media, whatever happens in Delhi, the international news media is sitting there, usually gets out. How about the states and the interiors? So many atrocities are being committed, especially this chief minister of UP. He is totally out of control. He's doing so many things that the High Court of UP themselves have to take up on the posters that he put the posters and put everybody's name. So can you guys comment on how do we get the news from the interior? And he's also being very, very heavy-handed on the journalists in UP. Thank you. Anyone can, both of you can answer.
So in the beginning, I mentioned about 10 cases in Uttar Pradesh where the Ajay Bisht government has arrested more than 15 journalists, or they were tortured, few of them, and many atrocious things happened with them. So I mentioned it in the beginning of the session itself, that how high-handedly Ajay Bisht is handling Uttar Pradesh. I say Ajay Bisht because he is known as Yogi Adityanath, but a journalist was arrested and sued for calling him by his original name, which is Ajay Bisht. So that's the kind of harassment that the reporters, journalists from Uttar Pradesh are going through. And even the High Court had to take cognizance of the billboards and the hoardings that he had put up about certain people. And but that's the situation. I mean, we know for a fact that a person like Dr. Kafil Khan, he has been imprisoned again under such frivolous acts, and there are people who are openly inciting violence right in Uttar Pradesh, but they are scot-free. But that's how today's Uttar Pradesh has turned to. Now, one day this each of them is becoming a Frankenstein, whether it is the Prime Minister of India or the Home Minister of India or the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. Now, we just have to wait that what is in the destiny for them.
Let me just add that it's not just the international media that ignores what goes on in some of these places, but it's also the so-called national media, which is also headquartered in Delhi. So as a result, things that happen in Delhi and in the immediate surroundings get a lot of coverage, but there's a whole lot of things that are happening in the rest of India that gets hardly any coverage. We haven't mentioned Northeast India, for instance. There's a great deal that happens in Northeast India that never finds itself in India. And there are many things in the South that often don't, because the North don't. So this is the manner in which the media in a large country like India operates, with national being defined as Delhi, and ultimately those are the stories that always get the prominence and not the stories that are happening outside. That's it.
Thank you so much. If anybody wants to ask a question, we have 5 minutes. I'm opening up the floor. You can raise your hand. And please go ahead and ask the questions, because in 5 minutes we are going to probably wrap up the call. Do you guys have any questions? Narsingh, I see that you have raised the. I'll open up the video, please, Mr. Narsingh.
Yeah.
And you can ask the question. Be specific, please. One liner, please.
Yeah, I think you cannot start your video.
Okay.
Start my video. Okay. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, now I can see you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm not too active for quite some time, but I became active from November last year when the judgment came on Babri Masjid. Since then, I was following what is happening in India, and I think after hearing to Niranjan ji and Kalpana ji, I know what they are going through in today's time. In spite of all the threats and everything coming to their families, they are still working so boldly to bring the truth to the people. I really appreciate for their services to keep this up, and I'm thankful that I'm part of this webinar to listen to you folks.
Thank you, Narsingh ji. I really appreciate your participation. If nobody has any questions, I am going to wrap up, and I will give Sunita ji to give a conclusion remarks. But before that, I would like, on behalf of Indian American Forum, Hindus for Human Rights, and Global Indian Progressive Alliance, we three are in partnership to raise this kind of brainstorming sessions. I want to thank each one representing each organization. I want to thank all of you, and to take up on Raju sir's comment. This is the first time we are doing the email. I'm going to have a conference call between us soon, probably on Monday, because tomorrow I'm working. So let's sit together and devise a mechanism where we can safely send out the emails and get the registrations and take care of this issue with our IT genius Ramakrishna and Iqbal now on board. So thank you very much. Remarks and give a thank note, and then after that Ramakrishna will also give a thank you note, and then he will officially end the call. Sunita ji, please go ahead and give your conclusion remarks.
My thanks have already been stated, and I echo them. I'm so inspired by both of you. The courage and just the dauntless commitment to progressive values, democracy, truth-telling. It just came through in both of your presentations, and I that's what gives me hope, because there isn't much hope from many corners. So thank you for that so much. And the groups that have come together to put this webinar together, and many others are committed to standing with you. So just know, in those tough, dark moments, that you're not alone. We're all with you, and you can call on us. And Hindus for Human Rights ourselves, Niranjan ji mentioned this. There's hate mongering and communal tensions and Islamophobia that's being spread right here in the Indian community and the South Asian community outside of India. And so our groups are on it out here too, because it's so connected. And Hindus for Human Rights in particular is trying to raise a Hindu voice to counter Hindutva in our spaces here. So just know that we're with you in philosophical ways and solidarity, but we're also actively doing our end of this work, and it takes all of us. And once again, just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sunita ji. I think we
you,
are running out of time.
Krishna.
Yeah.
I would like to acknowledge few people who brought this eminent speakers on board. Our Motika ji, I would like to acknowledge her and Raj sir. In particular, have invited Niranjan ji, Motika ji for inviting Kalpana ji. Ramakrishna, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think we are running out of time. It's time to conclude. Thank you very much for everyone joined. Thank you very much for the people who joined from India. I think a little bit late for you. And thanks for the guests who coming in. And we'll keep you posted for our next webinar. Whoever is already signed up for with emails, so they will be getting emails from us. No need to give an email again. And this recording will be, I'll be sending out the email, the same email you registered to. We'll be sending the record to that email. And please download if you want a copy. That will be deleted after 48 hours. But if you want this video, you always come to our Indian American Forum official Facebook page. It's always be there. This live was recorded. So, and please follow us on Twitter. We have a Indian IF official handle. Please, subscribe to us. So we've been doing this from past, I think 3-4 months. We'll be doing in every alternative week. So we'll keep you guys posted. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm officially ending the meeting. Good night to all.
Thank you so much for Ramakrishna. You are our brain of the IT cell. So I have to acknowledge you in particular for all your efforts in the background. Thank you so much, Ramakrishna. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.